I think we're getting near the end of the cycle. I still think that there's still room for Ethereum, to run back up to all-time highs. I think you will see that. But in the short term, I think the most obvious short-term move right now is that Bitcoin dominance should go back up. So liquidity right now should flow back to Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin should try to use that liquidity to try to push back up, hopefully near those highs again, and hopefully can put it in another all-time high. But that's how I see it playing out. If Bitcoin is at 130K, if it's at 130K or 140K and it's December, that's probably it, right? If it's at 180K, that's probably it. The point is, it's more of a time thing. Like, Bitcoin has the opportunity to go up.
Ben Cowen, founder of Into the Cryptoverse, says Bitcoin is moving almost perfectly in line with its historical seasonal rhythm. In past cycles, Bitcoin tends to peak in August or early September, then dip into late September or early October before finding its footing again. That same pattern showed up in 2013, 2017, 2020, and 2021, and it seems to be repeating now. August brought a high. September has been a mix of weakness and partial recovery, and if history is any guide, the real breakouts don't typically arrive until October. Cowen explains that the broader framework is still defined by Bitcoin's 4-year halving cycle. Major cycle tops almost always fall in the fourth quarter. Q4 of 2013, Q4 of 2017, and Q4 of 2021 all marked decisive peaks. If the rhythm holds, Q4 2025 could be the window when this cycle ultimately tops. That doesn't mean Bitcoin will stall in the months ahead, but it does signal caution for investors chasing momentum once the breakout happens. So what's a realistic target? Cowen says if Bitcoin climbs into the $130,000 to $180,000 range by December, that would likely represent the top of this cycle. Afterward, history suggests a cooling off period in 2026 before the groundwork is laid for the next run. In short, the cycle is playing out on schedule, and knowing the rhythm helps avoid complacency when the parabolic phase begins. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that actually understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
Bitcoin right now, it technically speaking, we are seeing so far it's been a positive month. We also saw 2023 September and 2024 September was also slightly green as well. So basically what happens with Bitcoin historically is that it'll put in a local top sometime in August or early September, and then it'll find a low in September. And sometimes the low will come in early October, but that's the general trend, right? That's the general trend. And so, technically August was a red month, but also Bitcoin put in a new all-time high in August, right? So it went up for the first half of August. And in September, so far, Bitcoin has been doing quite well. But it also put in a new low. But it went lower than where it had been basically since June, July, right? So it's a very common pattern that Bitcoin has. If you go back and look at basically all prior post-election years, you'll find a low or a high in August or early September, and then a low kind of like late September, early October. Here you see it in 2021. You'll even see it in 2020, a high there in August, and then a low forms in September. This pattern right here actually looks really similar to what we're going through right now. 2017, again, another high in August and a low in September. And then in 2013, you had this high right here in August, and then a wick down in late September, early October. So it's generally following the blueprint, right? That you get a high in August or early September, and then the market cools off for a few weeks, a consolidation phase. And you can even see how similar this move is to what we had last cycle, where you have this kind of capitulation low, and then kind of you go up and to the right, and then you pop up into that August high, go sideways, and then you go down, and then you just kind of consolidate there just above that 20-week moving average, right? It's basically the same thing playing out. And so to me, this isn't really different than what it's historically happened. We normally find a high in August. We normally find a low in September. So far, it seems to be playing out generally how it normally does. So far, the consolidation period for Bitcoin in the third quarter will typically last until kind of like the end of September. Even if you go look at all the prior years this cycle, you can see that the breakouts did not happen until October, right? You have October of 2023, And then last year, it was actually late October, early November. This is a common pattern. I mean, we've seen this many times, many other times as well. In 2020, the breakout was also in October. So I kind of think you're looking at something very similar, where you have these breakouts, but the breakouts don't normally happen until October. So I would not expect new all-time highs. I mean, at least for the rest of September. Hopefully we can get one as the year goes on. The one thing we have to be aware of for this year is that market cycle tops for Bitcoin, and this kind of gets in discussion of the whole 4-year cycle. Market cycle tops for Bitcoin tend to occur in the fourth quarter of the year. So you have Q4 2013, Q4 2017, and then Q4 of 2021, where the actual top occurred. So far this cycle, we've seen Bitcoin continue to go higher even into the following year after Q4. But when you look at the ROI of Bitcoin, say like as measured from the low each cycle, right? Whether you take that low, this low, here, right? Each of these lows, if you measure out the ROI from the low for Bitcoin and you just kind of plot them over one another, you can see we're getting close to, potentially the end of the cycle. So I would say that, once we get out into Q4, I don't think investors should be complacent. Right? I don't think they should be complacent. I think if we do get a breakout, we need to just be aware that at some point, we likely will put in a cycle top for this cycle, see some downside in 2026, and then just repeat the whole thing again. So, and I think we've talked about this before as well, it does very much appear like we are having, once again, diminishing returns. Every single cycle seems like we drop down a little bit in terms of the returns for Bitcoin. So a lot of times people think that like this cycle is different because the returns haven't been as great for Bitcoin, but it's just an artifact of a much higher market cap and the need to have exponentially more volume to move the price.
Ben Cowen says Bitcoin dominance tends to follow a predictable rhythm each cycle. In past bull markets, dominance would climb back toward the 70 to 80% range before cooling off. In this cycle, however, it topped out near the 61.8% level, pulled back, and then turned upward again. That move back to strength made sense because Ethereum had not yet bottomed relative to Bitcoin. Historically, ETH/BTC bottoms when Ethereum falls into its long-term regression band, and once that condition was met, Bitcoin dominance began to ease. Cowen explains that the current setup suggests dominance may be forming a low and preparing for one last push higher. This pattern has repeated in prior cycles. First, dominance retreats as altcoins briefly gain strength, then Bitcoin reasserts itself for a final rally before the broader market flips and alts have their big run. Both 2017 and 2021 followed that script, with dominance staging one last rally late in the year before altcoins took over. Cowen also emphasizes that Q4 remains the critical window. Every major bull cycle peak 2013, 2017, and 2021 has landed in the fourth quarter. If history rhymes again, investors should expect the cycle to culminate in Q4 2025. Let's get back to the interview.
I've seen Bitcoin dominance in prior cycles go to 70, 80% and whatnot. So it made sense to assume that dominance could at least return back to 60%. But if you look at last cycle, we saw dominance return to the 618. This cycle, it hit the 618. That's where it got a correction. But after it got that correction, I actually flipped bullish on dominance again back in late 2024. And the main reason was because we had not yet seen Ethereum go to its regression band, right? And normally, in order for dominance to really top out, Bitcoin, the valuation of Ethereum against Bitcoin has to bottom. And the issue in November, December of 2024 is that Ethereum had not gone to its regression band yet, right? Like it was still up here. And so, and if you just kind of overlay, right? You can always stop me if I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but if you look at ETH Bitcoin, you can see normally it bottoms out whenever Ethereum goes to its regression band. And so the reason why it sort of made sense to flip bullish on dominance, and I gave a target actually when we were at 60%, I said the next major level for us to hit would be 66, considering that Ethereum had not yet gone home. But then Ethereum went home, which is the regression band. That's where ETH Bitcoin bottomed. And we've seen Bitcoin dominance fall in the short term. I think what we're about to see, though, is the final rotation of the cycle back to Bitcoin. This is a very common thing. It should not be considered like a contrarian view, in my opinion. if you look at all prior post halving years for Bitcoin dominance, this is essentially what happened. In fact, last cycle, dominance found a low basically right around this level, and then it went back up into its final rally, right? You can see that. And then in 2017, in August, September, it found a low and then went up into its final rally. So I think that Bitcoin dominance right now is finding a low, and I think it's going to go up here as we get into the month of October. I mean, look, no matter how you measure it, if you want to measure it from the ROI from the low, we're getting pretty close to the end. Again, all prior major cycle tops occurred in Q4. If you measure it from if you go ROI peak to peak, you can see we've got a little bit longer, right? This would suggest we got a little bit longer, but not, again, Q4 is not the time to get complacent about it. And then if you measure it from the halving, you can see we're getting pretty far along. So, I think this cycle for Bitcoin has essentially done what it's always done. The main reason it feels different for people is because altcoins have lagged a lot, right? Like altcoins haven't really kept pace. And so that's why this cycle doesn't feel the same as prior cycles. But, Bitcoin is doing what it's always done. If history is an indication, you could see another rally in the fourth quarter, at least some point in Q4. But I do think we will have a cycle top before the end of the year, which will then set up the 2026 bear market, right? Again, all prior midterm years for Bitcoin have been bear markets, 2014, 2018, and 2022, right? You can see this is 2014, this is 2018, here's 2022. And sort of the rhetoric right now is that institutions have changed this and that it won't happen again. And I'll be the first to say that, anything's possible, right? I'm not going to say that it's impossible. Usually those bear markets happen from places of euphoria and places where altcoins are going parabolic. We haven't really seen that. But who knows? Maybe we will, right? Maybe we will see that in the next few months. I don't know. But I do think by the end of the year, if Bitcoin if people are FOMOing into Bitcoin, if it feels a little bit more euphoric and whatnot, it might be time to sort of think about, all right, things might go south in 2026, but it'll likely just be, an opportunity for long-term investors to buy Bitcoin cheaply again, just like they were able to in 2014, 2018, and 2022. So I think we're getting near the end of the cycle. I still think that there's still room for Ethereum, to run back up to all-time highs. I think you will see that. But in the short term, I think the most obvious short-term move right now is that Bitcoin dominance should go back up. So liquidity right now should flow back to Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin should try to use that liquidity to try to push back up, hopefully near those highs again, and hopefully can put it in another all-time high. But that's how I see it playing out. Yeah, but look at the last two major alt seasons, right? You had that one right there in 2017 or 2018, 2017, 2018, and then that one right there, right? You see those two? Mm-hmm. But notice that both of them, when they happened, what preceded them, right? What preceded them was Bitcoin dominance dropping and then getting one last rally, right?
I see.
One last rally. And then it dropped. Now look at the cycle before, right? Dominance was dropping, and then it got one last rally, and then it dropped. So right now, we're seeing the same thing, right? Dominance has been dropping. What I'm suggesting is that dominance is forming a low to go into the final dominance rally, right? So I'm not saying there can't be an alt season. What I'm saying is that liquidity right now is likely going to flow back to Bitcoin. And the reason I say it is if you just look at monthly returns for Bitcoin dominance, you'll find that September is often the month where dominance reverses course. Okay, so look right here at this September. Now look at 2020. You can see dominance found a low right around in September. Look at 2017. In September, dominance found a low and it had that final rally. And if you go back and look at a lot of these years, look at 2022. Same thing, right? Dominance found a low in September. There's so many examples where dominance finds a low in around that Q3 timeframe and then goes up after it. Or the reverse can also be true. If dominance is going up into September, then it typically reverses course and goes down after it, like you saw in 2019. So my point here is to say And also even in 2021, look, dominance found a low in September, and then it got its final rally up before it then went to its low. So my argument right now is not that you can't have alt season. It's just that the path to get there is important, and it's often overlooked. And and the reason I feel so strongly about this, right, is because we've basically just gone through 4 years of people screaming that alt season is around the corner, and sort of fading Bitcoin dominance, and then dominance continue to remind them that, hey, Bitcoin is the reason we're here, not your altcoins.
Patterns don't guarantee outcomes, but they do shape expectations. Bitcoin's rhythm has echoed past cycles with almost uncanny precision, giving both traders and long-term holders a framework to lean on. Seasonal dips, sharp recoveries, and quarter-4 climaxes have repeated often enough that dismissing them outright risks ignoring a clear historical tendency. What makes the current setup even more intriguing is how dominance and capital flow between Bitcoin and altcoins continue to mimic earlier chapters, suggesting we may be approaching the same late-stage dynamics. At the same time, the scale of money entering the space today is larger, the players more sophisticated, and the macro backdrop far more fragile than in previous cycles. That mix could magnify both the upside during the surge and the volatility that follows. For investors, the challenge is not spotting the cycle, it's resisting complacency when momentum feels unstoppable and preparing for the inevitable cooling phase that history says will come. If this rhythm holds true, will the next year mark Bitcoin's defining surge before the cycle resets? Or could this time diverge and surprise both bulls and skeptics? So stay tuned. If you're into real, data-backed takes on the financial system, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the weekly updates. Thank you for the support, and I hope you enjoy the video.